Present.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Here.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Okay. I want to first just point out for the record, which we've somehow dropped off the agenda because we never have anything for the record, but I do this time. I just wanted to let people know that I presented a mayoral proclamation yesterday recognizing Kevin Adler for his 5 years of dedicated service as director of the Folk Festival, and he's decided that 5 years was enough of an almost full-time job in addition to his regular full-time job. So there was a meeting of the Folk Festival Committee yesterday, and I was happy to take that and present it to him. And I have a copy here if anybody wants to see it. Then I also wanted to address an item that was presented to the council last week, which is a letter from residents requesting that I schedule a work session discussion to consider banning gas-powered leaf blowers. And I just wanted to say that the short answer to the question is yes, I will schedule a discussion. I think I need to schedule that discussion in January. We have about 4 or 5 meetings between now and the holidays this year, and our agenda space is full, and I know that even if we were to take up such a discussion, we wouldn't come to any conclusion for the fall leaf season, so I think January will be timely. But I'd like to, when we do take that up, make it a little bit of a broader discussion and to encompass at least the following points, and this is by no means a comprehensive list. 1, we haven't banned things. Is that an effective course of action? Remember that a nuclear-free zone and our water bottle resolution and past efforts regarding Burma and others are real purchasing restrictions for the city government, and recent efforts on foie gras and cage-free chickens are advisory and visioned as educational and also food-oriented. We would need to explore the legal issues surrounding the authority for any action and the enforcement of any potential ordinance. We might need to consider the flexibility to address a number of issues, including the ability of seniors and disabled residents to get work done on their properties, the impact on landscaping businesses and their customers, and the needs of large institutions, for example, the hospital, private and public colleges and schools, and city and county parks and facilities. Our strategic plan, our draft strategic plan, which the council discussed at length last week, and which will soon be out for comment, has a prominent goal of making environmental improvements focused on reducing climate change and improving stormwater management. It includes a priority project to create and enact a 5-year environmental plan with a budget that incorporates a greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan for the entire city. And it also calls for expanding sustainable practices in coordination with the new Regional Council of Governments plan and with the Montgomery County plan. And finally, I think this may be an opportunity to focus on the need for expanding the membership of the Committee on the Environment and or expanding the mission of the committee or replacing the committee with a group with an expanded focus or adding a new committee. This will be an opportunity for the signers of the letter and others to step up to the task of helping to design and implement an action plan to address this and other concerns about the sustainability and livability of our city and our environment. So we will be having a discussion in January as requested. And then if I can just point out a couple other quick items that I was honored to, along with Councilmember Robinson, attend the tree planting on New Hampshire Avenue on Saturday morning that will eventually screen the Pepco transmission facilities there. It was a nice example of cooperation between Prince George's County, Pepco,
Prince George's County, Montgomery County.
There was somebody else.
Donut.
Yeah, but a lot of nice holly trees got planted, a lot of bulbs went in, red buds, and hopefully it will make it a little nicer view for residents, businesses, and traffic on New Hampshire Avenue, instead of seeing that big ugly facility, to see some nice green there. I'd also like to note that Arts and Humanities Day was a real nice event on Saturday. There were, I know Councilmember Siemens was here and probably some others as well. Councilmember Robinson, it was a 3-hour event, and there were a number of entertainers here who put on a real good show. I made it a point to be here for the Washington Opera, and one of the things that they had was information on Family Look-In, which is an opportunity for kids, I think starting second grade and up, to go to the Kennedy Center on Sunday, November 15th at 11:30 in the morning, and it'll be looking at Bizet's Carmen, but it'll be an opportunity for everybody to kind of see how an opera is staged, to see how they change the scenery, how they deal with the props, how they deal with the music. It'll have, kind of a part of a full performance, and it's a real nice opportunity for people to see how a big production like that is put together. And then I also attended a ribbon cutting for 1001, 3, and 5 University Boulevard, which is Merrimack Gardens, and that's one of the 3 properties that Montgomery Housing Partnership has recently renovated, and this is the first one to open, and it's been a real nice project, and I was joined by Councilmembers Snipper and Siemens, and also Councilmember Irvin, who's here with us tonight, and Senator Cardin and many others, recognizing what a wonderful project that is, and how it's trying to address things like, as the county revitalizes Silver Spring, not pricing people who have lived there for a long time out, and seeing progress just take the people who have lived there and force them to live elsewhere as prices escalate. So this was a real nice opportunity to enhance affordable housing in the city and in the county. Do other council members have any comments? Okay, we'll go this way on this side. So, Councilmember Wright.
Great, thanks so much. I want to agree with the mayor on the leaf blower issue, and just focus really on the fact that I'm supportive of having the discussion, but want to think about it in the context of all of the things we could do to improve the environment and make sure that we're addressing that issue in what is most resource effective and effort effective in terms of greenhouse gas emissions in particular. Second is I'm very excited about the discussion we're going to have about Mansonization today, which also has a environmental and green component impact to it. Looking forward to learning a lot. I hope in the future we can also do a similar session on stormwater management. I think another area where the council could benefit from an intense learning educational session, and I'm optimistic that we can get something done related to Mansonization, and hopefully my hope would be that we could do that in conjunction with the county, again, to make sure that we do it in a cost-effective manner. Well, next, just the strategic plan that we've been working on. I'm very happy so far with the compromises we've reached on it and what that says, and I think that the strategic plan says, and I think that it's really something that has the potential to make Tacoma Park more the city we want it to be, sort of more Tacoma Park. And I've had some questions from residents, and yes, we will, as we refine it a little bit more, we will share it with residents and get resident input. And then lastly, to my residents in particular, you should look for a Ward 1 meeting notice. I've been working with some of the presidents of neighborhood associations, including Seth Grimes. We need to pin down a date and exactly what will happen at that Ward 1 meeting, but you should look for that to happen probably a week or two after the election. And there should be some fun times as well as some serious discussion opportunities. Thank you.
Councilmember Clay.
All right. Ward 1's having a meeting, but Ward 2 is having a party. At my house on Halloween night from 5 to 8, it's a potluck. We're going to have a haunted house, too. It's going to be lots of fun. I do this every year, and it's been a good time. Let's see. In the other council activities this week, there's an MML, Maryland Municipal League meeting that several of the council members are going to. And did I hear you say the firehouse
Yes.
groundbreaking is actually going to happen this week?
Yes.
I didn't put it on my calendar because it's been scheduled so many times and then changed. So.
It's Thursday afternoon at 1:30.
In the neighborhood, there was apparently an exciting police chase through the Devonshire Glazewood area that has got the residents concerned, and this is the same area where we had all the sidewalk and safety meetings in the same area where the woman got run over by the car on New Hampshire Avenue. And those neighbors continue to be concerned and would like to see the city take up the issue, particularly the issue of sidewalks, but other pedestrian safety issues at a meeting where we would actually come up with policies and procedures and guidelines and mechanisms for paying for and implementing a sidewalk policy were one to emerge from the conversation. Folk Festival, we went to the Folk Festival party, and the mayor came and did the mayoral proclamation for Kevin Adler, which was very nice. Kevin and his entire family, his wife Gina McNeil and his kids, have worked very, very hard on that through the years. And the Folk Festival is growing, and it's entirely put on by volunteers and brings lots of great musical acts from the local community and provides funds to the various volunteer groups who volunteer. They're the beneficiaries. My Girl Scout troop is one of the volunteer groups and a beneficiary. Volunteering with the Folk Festival is a great opportunity because it really is volunteer-led, and we need more volunteers to come in and do the various jobs. And there's all kinds of jobs, from marketing and grant writing to picking performers and doing hospitality for the performers. You know, there's the whole logistics side of it as well. Lots of different activities, and people can really take ownership of the part that they play, which is great. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm going to continue to volunteer. And so I would encourage people who are interested, whether you're interested in music or it's its own little kind of mini business fair. So there's all kinds of opportunities to come and check it out and see if there's something there that you might like to contribute. It's a great time, and I've met a lot of really terrific people in the community. I think it is one of those events that really gets to the heart of what's so great about Tacoma Park. So I would encourage people to participate.
And they can contact?
They can still contact Kevin Adler, but you can actually just call me directly, and I'll talk to you about what it's like to volunteer and connect you up with the folks who are interested. So feel free to call me. You can also go to the tpff.org website and find out about it and sign up there. But if you want to talk to a human being, you're welcome to call me, and I'm sure Kevin would be happy to hear from you as well. Last two issues. WSSC, I want to thank the city for their response about the WSSC WA issues. I understand that the city reports that they're going to be moving forward and have worked it out so that they'll be able to complete and pave the streets in the Long Branch Sligo neighborhood, which those people will be very happy to hear. And I also called County Council Member Valerie Urban's office to ask for some help. Just in general, in working with WSSC, it's the same issue, notifying people before you shut off their water so that they can make preparations, being realistic about what the timelines are for actually working in the community, because after it goes on a lot longer than what they said it was going to happen, you just get to feel like it's the never-ending road construction project in front of your house, and that's really frustrating. Council member's office was very responsive and has been very helpful, and I want to thank them for that. And the last thing is about a public education issue that has come up, and it in part came up because of the Folk Festival and the signage issue, and that is the issue of what is a public easement on private property, and what are the rights that are associated with that. And when I was at the Folk Festival meeting, the Folk Festival signage issue came up, and there are some people who think that the area in front of someone's house that is the public easement is open to anything that the public might like to do there, including, you know, putting up real estate signs and anything else that you want to. And other people have an understanding of the sort of the various legal aspects and what you can and can't do there. And I, for one, take down all the signs that people put on, because I live on a corner, I get lots of real estate agent signs, and I take them all down, and the real estate agents are unhappy with me. It would be, I wonder if that wouldn't be something to put out in the newsletter at some point about, you know, do you really have to tolerate people who come post things on your property? And the other side of that, and the other way that comes up for me as a council member, is that people will call me and they'll say, hey, WSSC or Pepco came out and they walked all over my flowers, or they dug up my azalea plant. You have to come replace it, or I'm going to sue you. And of course, it's in the easement, and so you don't. So different issues around it, and it might be worth a public education piece.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Mayor.
thank everyone for coming tonight. Although the mayor did mention that we did run into each other at the Tacoma Park Arts and Humanities Day, I did want to just comment that this was the second year for this event, and it was really fantastic this year. I really compliment the organizers. I think they did a fantastic job of bringing together a wide variety of different arts and humanities events in this building throughout the community center here in the auditorium and on clear over to the library. Found it very entertaining. I came for a half hour and ended up spending several hours because there was so much going on and so much to see and so much to enjoy.
And I believe you had your first chance to act in an opera?
As a matter of fact, I did get is suckered in the right word? Pulled into an opera performance, which was interesting. But other than that, I think now that I've done that, you don't have to worry about that happening, seeing me again in an opera next year, so you can come to next year's event.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. I too really...
Excuse me, if I may, I just want to point out there were no leotards involved. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, actually. I too attended the Montgomery Housing Partnership event, ribbon cutting, and was really thrilled to see that thing finally come to fruition. I remember when it all got started, and it's just a really great thing to see the tenants finally being able to move into their apartments. And I was also glad to see how many people from politicos came to be at that event. It was really nice to see Senator Cardin and, Valerie was there too, ranging from our mayor spoke as well. That was a great event. I also want to highlight a couple of things. One, there was an incident of a bicyclist getting hit the last couple of days, and I want to remind people, like myself too, ride safely, keep your helmets on and so on, and observe the traffic laws. We've already had, as I just indicated, we already had somebody injured riding their bike and not following the laws. I have a question about the WSSC and the street work. I've gotten a number of complaints about the WSSC contractor digging up the streets, and then months go by, long periods of time go by. So I'm interested to see what success you have there, Colleen. Pass any hints you have on to me.
The Councilwoman's office is extraordinarily helpful.
Call
Amparo, and she'll help you out.
Well, I know Amparo. She's good. Great staff person. Similarly with Pepco and the lights, I'd love to know what the magic secret is to get lights fixed. I know this has been an issue in Tacoma Park. So any suggestions there would be good. And then I have a compliment to the police department and a warning to the public. Someone in my ward, their house was broken into. The way it was broken into is the person or persons used the ladder in the yard, put it up on the side of the house, and climbed in a second-story window, broke into a second-story window. I urge folks, as the Tacoma Park police officer did, suggest that you lock up your ladders if you keep them outside. Even a bicycle lock will do to keep them from being used like this. And the police officer was very nice and did not say, "You were really stupid to leave your ladder there," but the homeowner already could figure that out without being told. I got a lot of appreciation for the police department's quick response on this, because the call was in the middle of the night, and they weren't, the owners weren't sure whether the person was still in the house or not. The police were there in a minute and a half. It was really great. That's it. Thanks.
Councilmember Robinson.
I want to thank Steve Davies and Seth for assembling the crew that signed that letter that the mayor commented on earlier. And 30 folks is a good number of people to sign a letter. I'm encouraged by the sense that we can take a goal like this goal that was promoted in the letter and work, I hope, through the committees and through staff and with all of us on the council to do some specific things and make the most of our committees. We need to focus on using our committees in a strategic way, but also a focused way. So there's an example is there's a potential beautification project on New Hampshire Avenue that I'd like to pursue, and so that's an example of a specific task. I was told by Ms. O'Quinn from Park and Planning tonight that they're redrawing their zoning ordinances for Montgomery County, and I'm intrigued and encouraged by that. I wonder, City Manager Matthews, if what we know about that and how we're going to be involved, and how we can be involved, because our zoning issues are specific in Tacoma Park, and I'm sure that we share some issues with other cities, municipalities in the county, and I want to make sure that we weigh in on how the zoning is redrawn in ways that would benefit us. Colleen, the signs on the right-of-way, the one that really bugged me last week was the drive safe, walk safe signs. I don't know if anyone has seen that, but Mayor Williams, I suspect that would have been one that bugged you, because if you didn't like shop local, then you certainly wouldn't like drive safe and walk safe, as it's an abomination from an English perspective. And I personally, now don't tell anybody this, but I personally removed about a dozen of those last weekend, and they were all on public right-of-way, so I think I was within my rights. And I also was curious about why those signs were there. Like, was that a park and planning effort to put these drive safe, walk, or was it a Montgomery County, or, well, in fact, it said underneath drive safe, walk safe, Presco. So I went and looked up Presco on the internet, and they're a company that specializes in prepping houses for sale. It's not it.
It's an umbrella of a President's Association of City.
Well, okay, great, good. Oh, I'm glad. Well, I don't know if I'm glad or not.
Presco is an organization of presidents of several Silver Spring civic organizations.
Well, then the internet, they have an unfortunate
Now, they're competing with
convergence.
someone else, I guess.
Clearly, they haven't met Grammar Man.
So I hope they're not offended that I took
Maybe
their
if
sons.
anybody's watching, I'm sure they will get that message.
Okay. The only other thing was that the Pepco lights situation, I have some of my constituents on Sycamore were quite upset about one light not being replaced, and we ganged up on Pepco, and it was fixed within a week once they got a number of calls from citizens. I informed Darrell, our Public Works Director, Darrell Braithwaite, and there was one particularly dogged citizen who tracked down the person to talk to and got a commitment saying, yes, it'll be done this week. So if you really sink your teeth in, you can get the lights done. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Barry.
Yes, Mayor. I would like to congratulate Councilman Siemens for his opera debut on Saturday. And let me tell you, folks, he was one of the most believable, if slightly undernourished, Carmens that I think I have ever seen. And Carmen, of course, the gypsy cigarette factory girl. It was just, it brought the house down.
Obviously, the refreshments were good, too.
So, and Mayor, I agree with your points that you made on the issue of the leaf blower, and without commenting on the merits of the suggestion, I hope that what we can do when we have this meeting is to frame it more in terms of what each household and each business in the city can do voluntarily to reduce their carbon footprint and increase recycling. And on the subject of thank yous to the city workers, the police need to be commended, Barb, for their work in apprehending a armed robbery suspect over the weekend in Ward 6 on Ann Street. I think the alleged robbery had taken place on University. The suspect fled, and the police were able to locate him and make an arrest, which is great. And then I noticed a couple of weeks ago a door hanger on my door, and it was on each of the doors in my area. I don't know whether my colleagues noticed them as well, but it was a door hanger filled with crime prevention tips, and I think that it was a product of the Public Safety Committee, the Police Department, and ably distributed by the Public Works folks. So please congratulate all of them for fine work. And let's see, anything else? I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay. I know that Councilmember Irvin probably has a tight schedule and wants to get somewhere else, so we'd like to accommodate her, and we've said that we would try and squeeze her in whenever she's here. I know that we have one or two items ahead, but maybe if we can move to you and get your report and any questions, and then we'll go back to the regular part of the agenda.
Thank you.
So,
I
welcome.
appreciate that. Thank you. It's so good to be back. I really enjoy coming out to spend some time with you, Mayor Williams, and all of the members of the City Council. I really think that this partnership is a great partnership, and as I listen to each one of you make your comments and reports, I have a lot of follow-up I can do, and I'm going to start with the issue of Pepco and the streetlights. There's a very simple way to get this fixed, and as Councilmember Clay said, we really deal with them through my office quite regularly, but if you can get the numbers off of the pole and call my office, it's really a quick fix. So if your constituents, all they have to do, there's a number on the pole, you call with the numbers, and we'll call Pepco, and we deal with them all the time, and their turnaround is pretty quick. So if that's the way you'd like to work with me on this, I would be happy to do it.
And have they managed to be able to have a quick turnaround without intervention?
I'm sure they would do it. I mean, of course, Ben's here. Ben Stutz, a lot of you know Ben. We can just give you our magic telephone number. You can call yourself if you'd like to, but there are people that we deal with all the time about replacing dead lights. So I want to start by saying thank you to Councilmember Siemens, who brought to my attention back in June of this year an issue regarding the is it Grenville Avenue? I can't even read my own writing, traffic study. And so we met with the Ritchie Citizens Association in July at your request and your invitation. And so I came out, and the long and short of the work we've been doing since then is Director Art Holmes has agreed to come up with the additional funds needed to do that traffic study, a one-time, and he's let me know this, he's called me on the phone, that would be a one-time $10,000 allocation which is needed to conduct a new study. So that will be underway. We're really happy that we were able to work with you, Councilmember Siemens, which I always am very happy to do so. I haven't been back out to the Ritchie Citizens Association, so if you can relay to them that that traffic study is going to be up and running.
Thank you.
My pleasure. I heard a lot of reports about some events that I also joined with members of the council on, and one that you didn't mention was the Walk to School Day at Piney Branch Elementary School. And I'm part of the Piney Branch family. Both my sons, who are grown up and moved away, attended Piney Branch, and so the county has begun its first high-incident evaluation area in that community, and this is part of my initiative on the pedestrian safety initiative. Ike Leggett and I both, and the county executive has decided to fund this with $5 million. So the high-incident area around Piney Branch is one of the first ones we're going to undertake. So we're really, really excited about that. I want to talk to you about the Smart Bike Montgomery program, which is also a new initiative from my office, and in consultation and collaboration with the county executive. We were very excited when we heard that the District of Columbia had a new smart bike program, and for those of you who have traveled to Europe and other parts of this country, smart bikes are everywhere. And so we've asked the county executive to start looking into beginning this program here, and this is part of our sort of ongoing conversation about alternative modes of transportation and the way that smart bikes would work. First of all, we want to partner with the city of Tacoma Park by having this be a site for the pilot. So we would like to put a smart bike operation at the Metro. And we're also looking at doing it at Silver Spring Metro and Wheaton Metro and a couple of areas in downtown Silver Spring and Bethesda. And this is part of the continuation of the Smart Bike program in D.C. because many of our residents travel to the district to go to work, and we think that we can connect up the D.C. Smart Bike program with the Montgomery Smart Bike program. So we're very excited about the prospects of beginning our work on that. One of the things that I've been thinking about for 2 years is a community gardens program. And I was recently in the Up County near the Ag Reserve and fell in love with Red Wiggler Farm. I've known about it for a long time. I went up to the farm. And the way that Red Wiggler Farm got started was that the Parks Department actually leased some parkland to this nonprofit organization to develop this community farm. Well, there are some opportunities, I think, for the down county. As you all know, you have a great farmers market here, and we're really encouraging local farmers and people are becoming very engaged in this idea of community gardens. And so tomorrow the council will be meeting with the Park and Planning Commission, and I have an idea to bring to the Park and Planning Commission about thinking about leasing some of its 1,000 acres of land that they usually lease to farmers in the Up County, but there may be some opportunities if we look around the county down in our neck of the woods to maybe, if there are some land that's not being used right now, that we would love to be able to lease some land for members of our community, just like they do in D.C. and urban areas all over the country, to lease small plots of land to neighbors who would like to garden, or if we can get some local farmers to help us out. So this is an idea. It hasn't been totally fleshed out, but we've been talking to a lot of people about it, so folks are very engaged around that idea. So I just wanted to put that out there, and if any of you are interested in working with us in partnership, I would love to hear your thoughts and ideas and continue to talk about this idea. Councilmember Clay, I know you contacted my office and have been in touch with Amparo Macias, and we are just waiting to hear back from WSSC on this issue, because we are waiting to see when they expect this work to be completed, but we're really pushing them along on your behalf, so thank you for the telephone call. We appreciate working with you.
Honesty would be good, even if it's going to take longer.
Even if it's going to take longer.
Honesty, actually.
We like honesty. And finally, I want to end with the Montgomery College Facilities Master Plan. I spoke with the mayor and Councilmember Wright before the meeting started. I recently took a walking tour with the residents who reside very near the college campus, and we know that the college met with the mayor and with you, Councilmember Wright, a few weeks ago, but the college officials have not contacted me as of yet. But I am certainly willing to work with the city of Tacoma Park and draft a letter on your behalf as we're sort of we're going through a lot of conversations right now. And so I look forward to continuing this conversation, but wherever I can be helpful, I would be happy to send them a letter on your behalf. So if there are no other questions or comments, if folks have anything they'd like to
I imagine
raise?
there's a few.
Okay. I couldn't get off that easy. Okay.
If I can start with a couple. When you were talking about the traffic study that the that Mr. Holmes came up with some money for. The thought that I had as you were talking about that was that what would be most helpful in the future, given that that's a one-time appropriation, is that as the county might be considering studies that bump up against the city in similar instances like that, either in that department or in others, that if there's a little closer coordination at the beginning, we might not have to do a study over because it didn't include the portion in the city. So I hope that he and others will be open to cooperation with the city to make that happen.
Well, I actually, want to just push back a little bit because as we found out, as we were investigating how this actually happened, there was some lapse in communication between the city and the county. So it's not all the county's fault. I think that both sides need to practice better communication, and I think in the future we'll definitely do a better job. I mean the county executive and his team. But that the night at the Ritchie Citizens Association, we brought staff there, and so the staff from your office and staff from County Executive Ike Leggett's office were there, and so we worked out as many of the kinks as we could, and then I asked Art Holmes to work with us on this because this was a very important traffic study.
We appreciate that, and I wasn't necessarily looking to try and assign blame in one place only.
Okay.
I was speaking to the cooperation that we all have to pay attention to constantly.
I appreciate that.
And one other quick addition to your comments about the potential for some land use for community gardens or farmers. An auxiliary piece to that is there have been some efforts to find a location for a value-added kitchen for farmers to take some of the produce and turn it into kind of, cooked or processed foods to be able to, take the cucumbers that they grow and turn it into pickles, canned pickles, or tomatoes, or whatever it might be to, turn it into other products to add the value to what they grow. It's of particular concern for all of the farmers markets in the whole Washington metropolitan area that there is no value-added kitchen for them to use, and there have been some discussions with some folks in the executive branch about trying to find that, particularly thinking about usage of the land in the ag reserve, that this is a sorely needed thing in the whole metropolitan area.
Absolutely. I think we should really sit down and talk about it because it's my understanding that there are a lot of people who would like to see the ag reserve used, especially for those kinds of uses. So we should be in touch with each other as we move through.
And just wanted to alert you to the fact that the tax and service duplication issue and the joint task force about county rebates to municipalities, in spite of many promised meetings of deadlines to get the report out, that my understanding is from the city manager that it may finally be forthcoming from the county side, and that that issue should be hitting the street fairly soon. We've been anticipating this for many, many months, and that will be a discussion that will need to take place. And I'd just like to remind the county council and our residents that in spite of the difficult financial times that we know many of us face personally and governments, that the intent with this issue was to try and fix the formulas, make them fair, with the recognition that there may be some phased implementation as far as the money is concerned. Because as I've talked to some of your colleagues, everybody kind of wants to just say, oh, there's no money. And it's like, it's not just about the money.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand. So I'm looking forward to the report myself.
Other people have things? Councilmember Robinson?
Thank you for coming, Councilmember Irvin.
Thanks for asking.
I had a question on the smart bikes. Is that a public-private partnership in the district, or is it simply a public or a private entity?
It's pretty much a private entity. You have to find a vendor who, the way the vendor makes money is by advertising. So there's no outlay of money from the city. There will be no outlay of money for the county. It's that you provide the sites, you have to find a vendor, contract to a vendor, and the vendors make their money off of the advertising on the bicycles and on the bike racks.
I see.
And the way it works is you use like a Smart Trip card, and you have to pay a certain amount of money that you feed onto the card, and you can take out a bike for up to 2 days, and then you just use the bike, and then you return it back to another rack along wherever we're going to have them, and you turn them back in. It's very much like using a smart card.
That's great. On the community gardens, there's a piece of property that's owned by Park and Planning near New Hampshire. It's called the Sligo Mill Overlook Park. It's not I don't think it's an acre. It might be an acre, but it might be a place to consider. It's I think it's in the CIP program for the park for Park and Planning, but I've never heard anything nearer than 5 years, so it might be a candidate.
Okay, thank you.
It's certainly down county. And we had Councilmember Elrich here last week, was it? And we had this. He paints a certain picture of the county's finances. That it's a tough time right now, and that and we had I think a healthy discussion about the relative strengths of cities. What can cities do? And Councilmember Clay had some very good points on that. I would say, what are cities good at, and what are counties good at? And then how can we maximize the benefit of the two entities? And I hope that Councilmember Elrich will continue that discussion with him, and that we can engage you as well to look at what cities do well and how we can play a stronger role. This has partly to do with the TASD or tax duplication issue, but it also has to do with county finances and county allocation of resources. And we do allocate our resources as best we can, and we end up offering services that duplicate county services. So it's part of that discussion. I just hope you'll continue, that we can all continue thinking about that.
No, I'm really interested in having that conversation, but because it's clear that 2009 and 2010 and 2011 are going to be very, very difficult financial times for all of us. And I can tell you right now that, unfortunately, the news from Annapolis keeps getting worse almost by the day. And at the end of the day, we're going to end up having to do some things that we haven't had to do before, which are really start cutting services that people are going to miss. And so it seems to me that we ought to begin right now engaging in conversations about what can we really do as partners here in the city of Tacoma Park and the county council. And I think there's a lot of room for us to really put our heads together and think about what we think we might end up having to do and how we can work together, closely together. I really appreciate coming to your meeting because I learn more and more about how important your roles are and how we sort of really fit hand in glove in a lot of ways. I see many of you out in the community at some of the same events that I go to, so really, you know, if it's about serving the needs of our constituents and the needs of our community, we're all on the same page. So there's not a whole lot of differences as far as I can see. I just think we need to learn more and more about how each other works. And so there's a lot about what you do that I don't know, and maybe vice versa. So we need to have more of these kinds of exchanges. I understand that George has come by, Mark has come by, I'm coming by. This is a good thing. But I think that maybe we should have more opportunities for the entire council to be meeting with your entire city council on a more regular basis. You know, this is the district I represent, but I think that the entire county council needs to really re-engage with our municipal partners, especially as we go through these really tough financial times.
Great. Thank you.
Councilmember Barry and Councilmember Siemens.
Hi again.
Hi there, how are you?
Fine. It's, I was very pleasantly surprised on Saturday to participate for the first time in the household toxic waste recycling program. And it sort of came up on me quickly. You have your list of things that you do on Saturdays: dry cleaning, take child to the soccer game, volunteer for Obama, and recycle your toxic chemicals. So I went over there with a station wagon full of household paints and other stuff that's been around for ages, really a lot of stuff. Bagfuls of batteries that I didn't know what to do with. And there was a very professional operation with a huge semi-truck, I guess used by a contractor to take the stuff away. Guys in hazmat suits greeted me there, took all the stuff away. It was amazing. And I hope maybe next year the city can become even more involved in promoting this event. And if there was some way to do it more frequently than it's done now, I'm sure we would see the numbers of people participating grow and grow. But it's a great program.
Yeah, we're really proud of that program, and it would be great if we could do it, a lot more often. But again, there are going to be some casualties here. Hopefully we're able to keep doing that one as often as we do it right now, because it is a fabulous program.
Yeah, and the opportunity cost of not doing it and having those things into the environment is a lot higher than the cost of the program.
Yeah, but I'm going to tell you, when you start looking at the cost-benefit analysis of a lot of the programs that we now support and things we take for granted, a lot of things, we are very fortunate in Montgomery County to enjoy so many excellent programs and excellent services. We're going to have to take a hard look at everything, including, of course, salaries and benefits, unfortunately, of county employees. And I've been engaged in conversations, because I chair the Ed Committee, with the Teachers Union and SEIU and the support, the principals and administrators. And when you look at a county budget, it's about the people that provide the services. And, in the school system, that's almost 90% of the budget. So these aren't the kinds of conversations that any of us like to have, but we really are up against a tremendous challenge right now. So it's clear to all the leadership of the collective bargaining, the unions and the collective bargaining process, that everything will be on the table. And as you all know, I fought real hard to keep the teachers' salaries and benefits intact in the last budget go-around, and it turned out that it was okay to do that. There was money there. Our constituents are not pleased about another round of increases to their taxes, and so I don't believe any of my colleagues really believe that that's the direction we're going to go in. We raised property taxes as high as we could possibly go. Actually, there were people that thought we could go even higher than that, but folks are hurting, and all of you who deal with constituents who are having a hard time paying their mortgages, paying their rents, buying food, all the just basic issues that we deal with on a day-to-day, on every single day that we live. A lot of those folks are going to be the first people to be hit the hardest. And so this is why I think having these ongoing conversations, I'm glad that Mark was here, I'm glad that George was here, but we're all concerned about, the same things.
And George will be here in 2 weeks. For the
Oh, he's
first time.
coming, okay.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, and welcome again, Valerie. Really appreciate you coming here. We learned so much, not just about your jobs, but of the difficulties that you face in doing your job as a county councilwoman, and really appreciate the opportunity to sit across the table from you and talk about these issues. I just wanted to touch on and let you know how deeply appreciative your constituents in Sligo Park Hills and the Ritchie neighborhood are that you were able to resolve that traffic study issue. It was something that shouldn't have, a problem that shouldn't have occurred, but I think we can make the coordination that's necessary between the city and county planners so that that doesn't come up again.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate your following that through to conclusion. And Barb, I wonder if maybe we shouldn't approach the county planning office, traffic planning office, and see if there's a memorandum of understanding needed or something, so that we don't have these issues come up again. Appreciate it. I also saw you at the Montgomery Housing Partnership, and again, that's been talked about, but I just wanted to emphasize how important Montgomery Housing Partnership is to the city. They had this ribbon cutting to conclude their Tacoma Park preservation project, but we're hopeful that they will, they're such a great community member, and they contribute so much to the community. We're hopeful that they'll be able to do more work here in Tacoma Park. I thank you for your past support of Montgomery Housing Partnership, and I really encourage you to, in these difficult times, continue to find ways to help them as they do other projects here in Tacoma Park.
Thank you very much.
Especially here in Tacoma
I
Park.
have to tell you, that was one of the most moving ceremonies I'd ever been to, and that's because I really appreciate what Montgomery Housing Partnership does. I appreciate what the county council does and the county executive does by funding the HIF, the Housing Initiative Fund, at the level that it's being funded. And every year we want to put more money in. I believe that housing is a basic human right. And there were some wonderful people there, the residents of Merrimack Gardens, and you know, I as a single mom myself lived in some subsidized apartments for many, many years. I haven't been a homeowner that long, and so for me, this is why I do what I do. I'm able to go to work every day and make sure that I give back to the people who go to work every single day. They work really, really hard, try to make ends meet, and we have to do our part to make sure that people everywhere, that we put a face on this issue of affordable housing, because so many people are struggling with it. So it was truly an honor for me to be there. And the city of Tacoma Park, you've just all done such a tremendous job in this area, and this is something that we should follow you. It's an area that the county is following the city of Tacoma Park, and we're very grateful for all of your advocacy on this issue. And so I tend to spend as much time and energy that I can on really talking about the importance of affordable housing for everybody who lives in our county.
Well, I appreciate your leadership on the affordable housing, and if there's anything that you know of that this council can do to help with those, please let us know. It's important to us. I thank you for the smart bikes idea. I think it's a great idea, and I think it's very timely given the global climate situation and also the current economic situation. I think it's a good program. I look forward to seeing that pilot successful here in Tacoma Park.
I do too.
And then lastly, I just wanted to comment on the community gardens. I wish I had brought my notes from a meeting I went to earlier today at the Capital Area Food Bank, and they talked about the great need for food in families, and including here in rich Montgomery County. There's a lot of need, and community gardens is one way of addressing that need for those who are literally going to bed hungry at night because they don't have enough food. My wife, as you probably know, distributes food for the Manna Food Center from Rockville here locally in Tacoma Park. We have been talking with the Manna Food Center about partnering to do community gardens. And again, Barb, I wonder if the area at Public Works where we've reclaimed some of the valley by years ago, dumping our leaves down in there, and it's unused property now, if that might not be an opportunity for a small community garden there. I can promise you that I can identify enough Tacoma Park residents to actually do the gardening work. Manna Food Center is committed to training the people to do the gardening and also to plant, to provide the seeds for the gardens. And I think they'd be very interested in talking with you, Councilmember Irvin, on how they can partner with the county to do that on a broader basis.
Wow, I really appreciate your thoughts on that. It's amazing. I was at a child care center on New Hampshire Avenue. Many of you probably know about it, Centronia. and they have a garden in the back. And they partnered with a nonprofit from D.C., and they had enough land that they built along a fence a garden. So the children are learning about planting seeds, et cetera, but they're actually really growing food that they're planning on using to feed the children at the center. And then at Merrimack Gardens, there's a wonderful garden in the back. So we're entering a whole new way to think about sustainability too, and that is, we need to relearn what our parents and our grandparents knew, and that is that the best food that you can eat, you grow yourself. And so I know there's land out there, and I appreciate the idea from you, Councilmember Robinson, about taking a look at the
Sligo Mill overlook.
And we're gonna do that. And so if you any other ideas about some space that you see laying vacant, we might as well just take this upon ourselves now. Make a commitment, the city of Tacoma Park and the county council, to really move this idea there. I'm thinking about even a resolution to pass at council about how we want to use some public space, public lands to do this kind of thing. So I really appreciate that.
And one other thing is to encourage city residents to plant gardens on their own property, provide their own property. And I know that Manna Food Center would be very interested in receiving some of the produce that surpasses what families need for their own consumption. I'd say they serve the needy population of Montgomery County, and they need additional food. The amount of food that they're receiving is not rising at the same rate that the number of needy people is rising.
Right.
Again, I thank you very much for
No, my pleasure. And I know that Councilmember Wright mentioned something about stormwater management a little while ago, and I met with Stormwater Partners, who are a fabulous organization, and what I'm learning about managing stormwater is really fascinating, because it also has to do with how we plant on our own lawns, replacing lawns with different kinds of vegetation. So there's a lot that we can learn about gardening and sustainability and managing stormwater, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all a big learning experience, and I think that young people really get it, and people who are hungry really get it. And so we need to, to begin this process again, renewed. And I appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Councilmember Clay.
Councilmember Wright reminded me that I really needed to start with just cause eviction. So as you know, we put forward the just cause eviction legislation last year, and it got caught up in some unfortunate politics. And we asked Heather Mazur to put it forward again this year, which she did, and she made a couple of modifications to the bill. But this is the second year that the city has asked the state legislature to put this forward, so that when people rent a house and they expend a lot of money to move their belongings and get their children set up in school and meet their neighbors and become a part of the community, that they have the right to stay there and continue to rent their housing as long as they abide by the rules of the lease and pay the rent. And it's just that basic of a human right, I think, to be able to stay in your housing that you have. I think it's good for the community. It's good for the kids to stay in the schools. It really helps build the community fabric. And I'm a landlord, and I don't mind being held to a standard that I can't just randomly evict people because I want an extra deposit, or I want to turn my house over and get it painted, or something like that, which I think happens a lot. As a city council person, I've had a few people in my ward who were. I watched a house at the top of my block that they refused to renew the lease every year, and turn it over, and they paint it and work on it, and they bill that to the deposit, and that's a terrible way to be, and you shouldn't be able to do that. And I think most landlords are good people and who don't do that, but for those who do, and they use it as a business model. I think that we need to be able to stop that and protect people in their homes. And so I guess what I would ask of you is that you would help to deliver that message to the other folks on the county council and help build some support for the just cause eviction legislation. One of the things that happened last year is that people, I guess it went to the county executive legislative analysis office, and they made some comments to some of your colleagues that this was a kind of a backdoor to rent control. And so we tried to clarify that in the legislation. It's not a backdoor to rent control. It doesn't have anything to do with rent control. We tried to clarify that in the legislation this year so that it specifically states that it doesn't have any effect on people charging whatever the legally allowable rent is in the community that they live in. So I'd like to kind of dispel that myth that got started. And we need...
Is that why it didn't pass the last time? What was
that was a little bit of it. And then there was a conflict with another politician out in the outlying parts of the county and couldn't get enough votes to pull it together. Our city staff person probably tell you more about all of the nitty-gritty of it. But I would love to have your support. You know that I'm not a proponent of rent control, so it's really highly unlikely that I would put forward and push for a backdoor to rent control. And I think we could use a person to
I would
help
be happy to do
move it
that.
forward.
Now, this is Heather's bill, and it's coming up in the 90-day session, so she has, okay, not a problem.
Great. The whole Pepco thing, you know, the light right underneath where the woman got run over by the car on New Hampshire Avenue, it still hasn't been replaced in spite of the fact that our chief of police came out and took down the pole number and reported it, and our public works director took down the pole number and reported it. I would give you the pole number, because we don't have it on me. But you know what would really help would be the county has a GIS map that has all of the light poles for the entire county with the exception of, is it just Tacoma Park or is it all the cities are blocked out of it?
Municipalities are blocked
All the
out.
municipalities are blocked out of it. So,
Although we do pay county taxes at the same rate.
okay, well, let's pick that fight later. If we could get onto that map, it would be a lot easier to provide constituent services because I know where the light pole is and I could look at it on the map. And if it's a question of somebody has to actually go out with a base map and write down the pole numbers, I would do that for my ward. And I'm sure that if council members wouldn't do it for their own wards, their citizen association groups would. So with the base maps, we could provide the information. I would even enter it into a spreadsheet if that's what it's required. It doesn't take very much to load the GIS data in. You could help us to get connected into that system. It would help us serve people for lights and would really help
That's
us
a really
to
good idea.
improve public safety.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
And I support the community gardens and the smart bikes. And now that I know that Grammarman has moved to the East Coast as well, I'm starting to feel much more like when I was in Santa Cruz. We had good community gardens projects there, and while I was in college there, they developed a shared bicycle program, and UCSC motto was the banana slug, and so they had a welder who liked to repair bikes, and he welded yellow banana slugs into the triangle frame of all the bikes and painted them all like yellow banana slugs so that they were really obvious as they went around town. Yeah, well, the fighting banana slugs. Anyway. And the Grammarman thing, the comment that I made about Grammarman, when we were there, somebody put up a new fence, nice new wood, but some people don't like fences, and somebody came along and they put graffiti on it, and it said, more fences, less trees. And Grammarman came along and scratched out the less and wrote in fewer, and then there was a series of Grammarman graffiti repair around town. So. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate you. It's terrific to have you as our council person,
so much.
and my constituents appreciate you as well.
Thanks so much for being here. And I want to just mention, and again, to thank you for your efforts with us in the college. We very much appreciate the college being here. We have said many times to them, we think they're vital to giving people opportunities in our community in the long term, and we hope to figure out a way to help them expand appropriately and maximize the land that they have. So we thank you very much for your efforts to help on that. Second, it wouldn't be Tacoma Park if someone didn't bring up the Metro with you, so I will bring up a small Metro issue. As you know, the UIA has resubmitted a plan to the WMATA, and they were here actually presenting that plan a little while ago.
Really?
And
When did they come?
A couple weeks ago.
a couple weeks ago, which we are appreciative of them coming and talking to the community. But one thing that Councilmember Snipper pointed out in particular is the sort of crazy aspect of how the buses will have to use the layover spaces. And the layover spaces have been talked about as this great advantage. And I don't think any of us sort of really realized it until we were looking at the plan and talking about the bus flow. So it is something that Bruce and I will probably just show you when we come see you on Monday, because we want to make sure that Ride-On's aware of this, because basically with almost all of the layover spaces, if a bus wants to use it, depending on which side they are, they either have to go out and around the station once or out and around the station twice. So we think we should make sure that they said that they weren't really responsible for designing the transit aspects. That was WMATA and Ride-On commenting. So we just need to make sure that Ride-On knows what they're getting with a new plan on that perspective. Would appreciate your help on that.
So, can I just ask a question about that? So, who from Ride-On has signed off on any of this? Has anybody seen it, to your knowledge?
I mean, I know that Ride-On signed off on the original plan. I don't know if they signed off on the latest one that went to WMATA or not. I mean,
Okay.
at the meeting we were at with UIA, someone from Ride-On was there. Was it? No.
It was
No? There was-
Gary.
Gary was there.
And he wouldn't speak either, that was the...
Oh, at our meeting? No.
No, Gary wasn't here at our meeting. I was talking about the meeting where Bruce and I went and talked to UIA with Valerie
It was the WMATA
earlier.
rep who was here.
Yeah, the WMATA rep was here, but it wouldn't say anything about that at our meeting.
Well, okay. Well,
So I just want to make sure, I think
We'll
that's
talk
an
about
issue
it.
that we should make sure that you're aware of. And then the light pole issue, I just want to agree with Councilmember Clay in particular, because I've seen that map. I've actually gone on it to try and see if I can figure out a way to do it in Tacoma Park. But it's particularly appropriate because a lot of times you notice the light when it's out at nighttime, but you might not feel safe going out there with your flashlight to write down the pole number, and the next day you sort of forget about it. And the beauty of that GIS map is you can just go on and click on it and learn the pole number. It's a great service the county offers. So.
right. And I think it was Councilmember Siemens who said you're paying for it anyway. So let's see what we can get done on that. Next time I come back, maybe I'll have something to report.
Oh, and you'll be back in 2 weeks?
I'll see you two, though. I'll see many of you before I come back next. So I just have one question, and that is, how did folks receive EYA's plan? Were there people here that night?
Oh, there were
a lot of
people here.
There were a lot of people here. We mainly intended it to be sort of a questioning, get questions answered. People will have the opportunity to answer questions or get their questions asked and answered. There weren't a lot of answers to the questions I think that people really liked. And so it became a lot of comments, and generally I think the community's perspective is pretty similar to what it was before, that yes, they improved separating bus and car traffic, but that beyond that it's still sort of a plan that puts transit second and sort of crams up the site, and people are very concerned and continue to raise transit issue concerns. And EYA felt like, they came to answer questions, and their plan is to move forward whether they get buy-in from our particular community or not. And so...
I think you could characterize it in the terms that are being bandied about these days as the shade of lipstick changed, and it was a good shade, but it was still lipstick on a pig.
That's okay, that's good. Well, thank you all very much. I look forward to coming back in a month. Is that
Sure.
how often I come back?
Well, that's what we try for. It doesn't always
That's
work.
what we
but-
try for. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. And I apologize to anybody who was here for public comment, but we try and make sure that we can have the good graces of Councilmember Ervin as often as possible, and we know that we can best do that by not making her stay around too long when she's here. So we'll go back to the regular part of the agenda. I'll just make a quick comment or two about the agenda scheduling update. That one of the things that came up in earlier comments was about the discussion on signs on public property, and we do have a tentative discussion regarding that on November 17th. And I'll just point out that one of the other discussions coming up that we have been wanting to get around to for some time is the scheduled November 10th discussion on the council grants program. And as we've pointed out, Councilmember Leventhal will be here in 2 weeks on November 3rd. And now we're back to time for public comment. If anybody has any comments they'd like to make, if they would please come to the podium and identify themselves, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes. Thanks.
It's like somebody left their laptop here.
That's because of the presentation.
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Williams, respective council members, city clerk, city manager. My name is Margaret Baraimo. I am a resident of Tacoma Park. Actually, I just learned that Councilmember Barry is our representative. I'm over at 7333 New Hampshire Avenue. And I am respectful of time, so I'll probably have to do sidebar conversation either with Mr. Barry or Councilmember Irving that just left. I, along with a fellow neighbor of mine right here, John, who's visually impaired, we just wanted to raise an issue regarding the condo conversion that's taken place at Tacoma Overlook. It's been renamed to Tacoma Overlook. It was formerly Hampshire Towers. To cut a long story short, I called on behalf of my mother, who's a senior citizen, because we recently went through a rent increase. And the way in which the notification, or in my opinion, lack thereof, was distributed was very alarming. And John brought it to my attention that he was not even properly notified, and he's been a tenant for over 28 years. He can speak on his behalf. At any rate, what I found disturbing was during the summer or late spring, we were told through the rumor mill that our units had been sold. And my mom, especially being a senior citizen, she was definitely concerned. We used to have a tenant association. My understanding, I don't know if it's true or not, that the rights of the tenant association were sold to Tenacity. Basically, I just want to know who's advocating on behalf of this condo conversion. People who live there, they're continuing to pay their rent. I went onto Tenacity's website and found that in his case, his unit has been sold. And I know during the last 2 years, there were a series of documents that were presented to tenants to sign if you fell under certain exceptions, such as being a senior citizen, being disabled, et cetera. So it's very disconcerting to pay your rent and then to see on the website that your unit has been sold from underneath you, but yet nobody has brought it to your attention what your status is at the apartment building. Dreyfus Management claims that they sent out a rent increase letter in July, which I can say we did not receive. John said he didn't receive it, and people kind of were alarmed when the rent went into effect October 1st. So pretty much when I spoke to the Office of Landlord-Tenant Affairs, they just suggested that I come and attend this meeting this evening, just to inform or to bring it to your attention. I don't know who, I would be directed to, maybe Councilmember Barry or another person. But really, the treatment of Tenacity towards some of the tenants, or just to me, their whole behavior, in my opinion, has been less than respectful. We have a very large immigrant, multi-ethnic community, but, that doesn't mean that people are lacking their wits or they're not intelligent or they're not capable of, defending themselves or representing themselves. My schedule, I travel a lot, doesn't permit me to come out. I like to be informed just like the next person. So whatever I have to do, I brought him with me, and I informed him, very last minute. And I brought him here, and I'm sure he can share his own story. But we just want to know who can we talk to, or what can be done, just in terms of what the status is of that particular conversion, because it's very alarming. I have the paperwork, or I printed out online that units have been sold. So I just wanted to know, who do we correspond with, interact with, and who really legitimately is advocating on the behalf of the tenants with respect to the landlord? Thank you very much.
Councilmember Bragg?
Yes, thank you very much for coming, and it's nice to meet you. And I have a card here that I'd like to give you before you leave so that we can talk offline during the rest of the week. If memory serves, and it's been a while since the Tenacity people have been before us, we questioned them very closely on the way in which they would handle the conversions and the way in which, after offering the people who had been renting those apartments prior to their conversion, would be offered a place in the other building, and how this communication was to occur. And we were satisfied that it would be carried out in the way that they had described it. So I'm very unhappy to hear tonight that according to your report, that may not have happened. What is hopeful in resolving this is that we have a tenants group that was organized in that building by the city staff, and the C-Safe group has also been there and knows the members of that group. And I would propose that we convene a meeting with them as soon as possible, and that we also speak to the Tenacity folks and let them know of our concern and have them respond to us. And so it would be then two steps. You and I will talk. We'll get the tenant committee together, and then we will talk to the Tenacity people and get to the bottom of it. Okay? Yes, John, by all means, sure.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Thank you. Respected Mayor, council members, it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank you for the opportunity. As Margaret just pointed out, I basically have two primary issues. One, as far as the rent increase issue, I generally pay my rent. I certainly always pay it by the 1st, and many times, most of the time, actually in advance. And so I paid my rent on the 26th of September and was actually given a receipt. And nothing was mentioned to me at that time that I owed an additional amount of, an additional amount. And so then on October the 1st, I was actually went to the mailbox with a neighbor, and the neighbor that I was with tapped me on the shoulder and said that they want to see you over in the rental office. And so I said, okay. And so she walked me over to the rental office, and I was told at that time that I owed an additional sum. And of course I questioned. I said, at first I wasn't sure what they meant, and they said, oh, didn't you know that the rent went up October 1st? And I said, no, I didn't. And I said I did not receive the usual 60-day notice. And so that the assistant that actually was talking to me, and at that time, then she called Miss Turner, I guess, who's the property manager there, and so she came over, and so I told her what had happened, and so she was rather unpleasant and didn't offer any kind of assistance or anything. I said, what provisions are you planning to make? And she just said that I had till the 10th, and I told her that I've been in the building for 29. I'm starting my 30th year there, and I've never been late with my rent, and most of the time pay in advance, and I've always followed the guidelines of rent increases. I've never protested a rent increase or anything. I've always been very cooperative. I've been a good tenant there. And so I met with the people in Tacoma Park, and they've been assisting me with filing something, and so we'll see what the outcome of that is. But ever since tenacity has kind of taken over. The treatment of the tenants has been, as Margaret said, less than respectful. A few months ago, I was told by a neighbor that my unit had been sold, and of course it was on a Saturday, and of course I was very really surprised, because I had been told by Tenacity that due to my disability that I would not be displaced. And so when I called the general manager of Tenacity, he completely changed his tune and was very, very, very nasty, and said that I hadn't filled out all of the paperwork and that sort of thing. And I remember filling out everything that was sent to me. Nothing was sent to me in any kind of accessible format, or no attempt was ever made by Tenacity to make anything in an accessible format. But I filled out everything that I received, and he said, oh, it's very likely that your unit could have been sold, and I don't know. It was just a very, very, very unpleasant experience. And so, as I say, as Margaret pointed out, it's not a very good situation over there right now. So.
Thank you. I'm sorry to hear that things have gone this route, and I hope that with the assistance of Councilmember Barry, you'll be able to work through this. Is there anybody else?
Is this the time to comment on mansionization?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Ellen Cassidy of the 7300 block of Cedar Avenue, and I want to thank you, Mayor Williams, Reuben Snipper, and Josh Wright for the interest in the issue of mansionization, which you've expressed to me, and Mayor Williams for the invitation to comment tonight. Close to where I live, a house has been torn down and replaced with a much larger house that I believe is outsized and out of character with its surroundings. A trend toward tearing down existing houses and building much larger houses, often referred to as mansionization, is occurring in many local communities. And residents of these communities have been dismayed to see the character of their neighborhoods radically changed by structures that have adhered to all existing regulations. This trend is not yet widespread in Tacoma Park, but I believe it would be wise for us to anticipate the possibility rather than try to play catch-up after the fact. Tacoma Park's tree ordinance has helped to preserve the distinct character of our community, and our historic district restrictions have also been effective. But now the question is whether existing regulations are sufficient to protect all of our community against mansionization. Now, at first, this issue may seem to be a slippery matter of taste that doesn't easily lend itself to regulation. But as more and more communities are finding out, this is not the case. Tacoma Park can keep the mix of individuality, diverse tastes, and varied housing styles that we take pride in, while at the same time guiding, rehabbing, and new construction in a way that builds our sense of community rather than dividing us, if we act now. Across the country, common sense anti-mansionization regulations are making a huge difference in community after community. And these regulations include specifications about maximum percentage of tear down allowed, minimum lot size, front, side, and rear setbacks, gross square footage, floor area ratio, sky plane requirements, which have to do with overhangs, maximum height of a building, obstruction of view, protection of trees, and total percentage of lot acreage used for the footprint. I would like to urge the council to get to work on this issue. Work with the Montgomery County Council. Look at the zoning overlay that Chevy Chase DC has developed, which I forwarded to the city planner, Alana. Check in with what Arlington and PG counties are doing so that Tacoma Park can benefit from these sensible, community-oriented measures before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope you have time to stick around for the presentation.
My name is Sabrina Barron. I'm the president of Historic Tacoma. I want to echo Ellen's comments and thanking the council for having this presentation this evening, and I'd also like to thank Council Member Snipper, Wright, and I know from conversations with my own Council Member Clay that she has concerns about some of the mansionization that's been going on in Ward 2. On my street, it's sort of rampant. We're outside the historic district. We don't have even the small protection that the Historic District offers where I live. There seems to be a loophole in zoning which allows all but 3 walls of a house to be torn down, and that makes it a remodel rather than a tear down and a rebuild. That's happened to 3 houses within half a block of me in the last 1.5 to 2 years. All but 3 walls are torn down, and then 6 bedrooms, 2 kitchens, and a 2-car garage, and God only knows what's going on in the basement, gets added to those 3 walls, which ultimately get covered up, and you can't even tell the original walls are still there. So if the county's going to be working on zoning, that's one loophole that needs to go immediately, I would say. So I look forward to hearing the presentation tonight, and I look forward to the council's continued dedication to this issue and working with the county on this issue. I want to switch hats and talk as the resident of 424 Ethan Allen Avenue. I want to talk about signs on public property. You probably need to do a little research, because as we found a few years ago, in my block, the 400 block of Ethan Allen, we own all the way to the curb. There is no public right-of-way in the 400 block of Ethan Allen. So I put signs in my yard every year, which somebody, who was it who tore down a dozen signs? Somebody feels compelled to come along and take the signs out of my yard, signs that I actually pay money for on occasion. And I understand that the right-of-way works kind of in the same idiosyncratic way throughout the city. So it would be good to know what's public property and what is not. There is no public right-of-way in the 400 block of Ethan Allen. Gas-powered leaf blowers. We have to be concerned about everything that contributes to our carbon footprint. And these things, you guys have got to know, there's studies that show how badly lawnmowers, gas-powered lawnmowers and gas-powered leaf blowers contribute to carbon dioxide emissions. It's out there. It's proven. And noise pollution. Noise pollution. These things are horrible. I have a real problem with these where I work at the University of Maryland, where some landscaper is outside my window with a gas-powered leaf blower for the entire 75 minutes that I'm trying to instruct the future generation in the finer points of the history of Western civilization. And I've seen at the University of Maryland 5 of these things with the motors running lined up on a retaining wall and not a landscaper in sight. So there's a problem with gas-powered leaf blowers and why people cannot use a rake. Well, I know why landscaping companies and municipalities can't have employees use rakes, because it costs more money to pay the laborer to use the rake than it does for the evil polluting, noise polluting gas-powered leaf blowers. So I would encourage you to think about the banishment of gas-powered leaf blowers. Thank you.
Thanks. Is there any other comment? Seeing none, we will take a very short break, and then we will move on to the presentation on infill development. So we'll take a couple minutes to stretch and make sure all the equipment is working. And when we come back, if the council wants to take a seat down in the audience, and if, depending on whether we decide that we want to maybe ask some questions during or after, if we want to ask questions during, or you anticipate that you do, you might want to sit at the table with a microphone. It's going to be made by Mary Beth O'Quinn from Maryland National Capital Park and Planning. Welcome, and sorry for the delay in getting to this point in the meeting.
Oh, that's quite all right. It was actually quite interesting, and it really is gratifying to see you at work. And so good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I'm here to present a summary of the work of the Infill Housing Task Force that was almost completed as of last week, but we're still working. The task force was convened by Council Member Roger Berliner in response to his constituent concerns over this issue of houses, infill housing, that is out of character and out of scale with its surrounding areas. This is often quite frequently referred to as mansionization. As you can imagine, many builders and developers look at that as a sort of pejorative term, and so we have chosen the term infill housing to provide a more neutral background to this issue. The purpose of the task force was to, first of all, study the problem and devise an approach for studying the problem and looking at potential solutions. And we devised a research method, and in that we surveyed the various physical attributes that constitute this problem, and then we also looked at, did a literature review of the way this problem is experienced in different jurisdictions, and also the solutions that different jurisdictions have come up with. And then to study it more locally, we picked a model block in the Brookdale neighborhood, which is in Friendship Heights, to look at possible solutions and what do some of these solutions actually result in. And we built a 3D model. And then we looked at what does architecture really do for you? How does it control scale, and how does it affect neighborhood character? And then finally, we'll look at the kind of summary of issues addressed. And the photographs here are the Brookdale neighborhood. As you can see, this is a neighborhood that was established in the late 1930s, early 40s as part of the expansion of the workforce prior to the World War II. We wanted to look at the challenges of the issue, especially in regard to this neighborhood, in terms of the interconnections between the public realm of the streets and the private realm of the yards, and what the intermediate space, the side yards do, and finally the function of rear yards and private space. And we wanted to look at the sequential growth and the spectrum of impacts that result in sort of historical additions to houses and what that actually produces. And in this regard, what we looked at for the physical realm was lot coverage, that is the percentage of the lot that's actually covered by a building footprint. And in terms of the zoning ordinance, this does not include paved areas, so it's a different definition than impervious. We also looked at required setbacks and how this affects not only each individual lot, but the actual character of the street. We looked at the buildable area, which is the area of the lot, the net area of the lot, once you apply the setbacks. We looked at building height and massing, which is the bulk and form of the house. And then we also looked at floor area ratio, which is a measure of the size of a house relative to its lot. You can see in the sketch on the lower right here, two different houses that are infilled between, the middle house is the one that's been replaced, and the effect of the overscaled house on the street with respect not only to its height and massing, but to its placement on the lot. Then we looked at, with respect to the Brookdale neighborhood, we were looking at development standards of the R60 zone, which is prototypically a 6,000 square foot lot, usually 60 feet wide by 100 deep. And we looked at those development standards with respect to the side yard setbacks, which has to be a sum of 18, minimum of 8 on a side. The height now in that zone is 35 feet to the ridge line of the roof, or 30 feet to the average of the eave, 2.5 stories. In this zone, 35% lot coverage is allowed. The front setback now is 25 feet and the rear setback is 20. You get a sense of the character of this neighborhood in which the paved roadway is actually much more narrow than the formal right-of-way, which is in the public domain. We also looked at the buildable area, green area, and tree save. And at the lower right, you can see a drawing that we made showing these various setbacks and how a house typically sits on one of these lots. And we looked at how height affects the perception of a building. Now this building, which is in Bethesda, actually has a height, an average height that is less than 30 feet. And how the roof lines work to break massing, make it a more humane scale. You can see there that the roof line over the garage is broken by a dormer. This actually makes the volume of the garage and the bedrooms over it, it gives it a smaller scale because it's mediated by that window. Likewise, the way their double roof there breaks the massing of the main portion of the house, and it also contrasts with the gable, which is at the perpendicular angle. We also looked at volume and bulk, and here you can see the volume of this house is also broken up by this sort of twin gable treatment, one of which slides forward from the other and incorporates a porch with architectural detail, which actually serves to mediate the scale of the entire volume of the house. On the upper right, you see a drawing that shows the sky exposure plane and the angle of inflection of the massing. Here is an example of floor area ratio, and the committee actually spent quite a lot of time on floor area ratio. Typically, a floor area ratio of 1 can be executed in a number of ways. One is to cover the whole buildable area with a one-story building, or cover half of the buildable area with 2 stories, or a quarter of the area with 4 stories. In each of these cases, the building is the same size. It's just how it's articulated and how it sits on the lot that makes the difference. You get the same amount of square footage in each of these examples on the top right. And on the bottom right, you can see an example of different FARs and how that affects the volume and massing of the house as well. The committee actually investigated FAR as a control mechanism for quite some time. And currently in Montgomery County, the only residential zones that are controlled by FAR, the most apt example is Garrett Park, which has applied an overlay zone, and their FAR is 0.375. The CBD zones, of course, have FAR, which is typically applied to commercial, but as a result, the residential mixed-use buildings typically carry an FAR ratio. Then the next thing we looked at was how various districts make their controls and the effects to which they are applied. The most robust control mechanism is a historic district, local historic district, and we examined Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Indianapolis, Indiana, which actually have very strict controls on not only restoration and materials and the size of windows, but they also control the additions and the lot coverage. It's actually quite effective. We also looked at special legislation that was enacted for insurance control in Los Angeles, and they utilized a method of FAR controls with bonuses. And the benefit of that was it actually reduced the size of the house. They got a proportional story bonus. They actually managed to create a pretty unified, uniform massing within various overlay districts that were mapped. The control of the massing was not as successful as they had anticipated. And it couldn't control actually where they put the house on the lot. It could only control the size of the house. And it didn't control materials or style, right? Of course, out of all of this, the most difficult thing to control is style. Then we looked at comprehensive restrictive zoning, which was tried in Winnetka, Illinois. And the benefits of restrictive zoning is that you can get exactly what you try to get. You can get what you want. You can control height. You can control facades. You can control setbacks and articulation and private zones and public zones. The difficulties of that is that you really have to rewrite the zoning ordinance, and it's extremely labor intensive. It requires consistency with state and other jurisdictional law. It's less flexible, and it can be challenged legally, which it was in this case twice. And so, after 4 or 5 years, these people still didn't have their zoning in place. Then there's the tool of overlay zoning, which is the case in Garrett Park. That was executed through the Garrett Park was executed through the master plan process with a zoning text amendment to create the overlay zone. This has actually been done. Overlay zones are kind of infamous in Montgomery County. They exist in Silver Spring, and I think there's 18 overlay zones in the county now. This effort was also rescinded legally, and they had to try again. And they eventually ended up with, after much opposition, they ended up with a tiered review system where you could get a house addition by right if you followed these very restrictive controls. And if you wanted a more expansive addition, then you had to go through a hearing and formal review. And then Portland, being the creative folks that those are, they invented sort of a transfer development right, a TDR as it were, for as incentive zoning. It sort of works in a way like the TDRs in Montgomery County that preserve the ag reserve. In this case, it was applied on a per block basis, and For example, if a homeowner who knew they never wanted to add to their house could actually agree to an easement being put on the lot, and in return, they would get either a tax abatement or a payment in lieu of this easement. And that density from that particular lot could be transferred within the block to any other lot owner who wished to expand. So it's sort of this, zero-sum game within a lot that or conservation of matter or something. It allowed each block to a certain amount of density, and it could be transferred within the lots in that block. The difficulties of it were that the demolition permits were very complex, but actually effective. The burden of proof was on the applicant to show that they indeed were entitled to that additional square footage. They gave credits for the additions by the use of sustainable materials and methods as well. So it had this sort of green component to it. Then there's the Neighborhood Conservation District, and this is sort of a very, very flexible tool that exists in a number of different types of forms. You can have an incentive-based neighborhood conservation districts, or you can have a mandatory review-based. So one is sort of carrot and the other stick. And then you can also divide this into like an administrative review where it would sort of be a planning office staff level review, or you can go to a more formal system where it's a commission review with an actual vote and an approval. And you can see here the jurisdictions that utilize those different forms of the Neighborhood Conservation District. As far as the physical framework itself, we wanted to look at these neighborhoods in terms of this continuum of public, semi-public, and private. And we regarded the street up to the lot line as the public realm, and that typically includes sidewalks and the street tree panel in the kind of standard neighborhood. And then the frontage, the front yard up to the building line is really a semi-public area. It's shared visually, it affects the street character, it affects the neighbors, right? And then finally the rear yard, which is the private area. And we also looked at this transect that same kind of concept exists on a neighborhood level, and how do you address this within transitions between different types of neighborhoods? How do you apply conservation districts or restrictions on building over these transitional areas? And then finally we looked at hybrid forms, and Brookline, Massachusetts now is working very hard on coming up with a sort of form-based code that's based on this and the Neighborhood Conservation District. One of the difficulties of a very stringent neighborhood conservation district, such as Chevy Chase has here, is that it requires a tremendous amount of staff time to document existing conditions. For example, Chevy Chase, they have a database in a record for every lot, how big that lot is, what is its impervious area, and what's its building footprint. And that is a lot of time to do that and to verify the data as well. And finally, we looked at special legislation. In Lake Forest. Their building scale ordinance essentially just involves roof height, and it really is effective. It has proportional garage massing, and it talks about the width and height of a structure and the placement of the roof. And you wouldn't think it would work, but it does what they need it to do. Now, this is a more it's sort of a garden suburb kind of neighborhood that's fairly historic, but the lots are fairly big in this neighborhood. And then getting to our model, you can see it's a little bright here, but you can see the area where we studied. The neighborhood of Brookdale itself is outlined in red, and then there's an area right there that is the block we modeled. And we picked this block for a couple of reasons. First of all, this is Western Avenue running this way, and then this is Wisconsin Avenue. And this is the block with the new Bloomingdale's, right? And here is the Chevy Chase Circle. This is Geico over here. Here's the Lord & Taylor, and the Mazda Gallery is right there. And so this is really a block off Geico. And we picked this block because, first of all, it's ripe for additions. It's near the metro. These houses are very desirable because it's near the metro. You can see also the scale change between this fine-grained, rational pattern in the district and the beginnings of suburbia over here. So you really get that juxtaposition between formal planning and it's not quite post-war, it's really pre-war, but it really is pointing to post-war development in a very seminal way. Also a stream buffer and old houses that need to be upgraded as well. You can see here the CBD here and how it's almost like surgically implanted into this fabric of housing, this residential swap. You know, you get this CBD sort of rising out of it, and the proximity of this Brookdale neighborhood to that CBD area, it's really contrasted. And you can see the impervious area. I mean, this is a pretty green neighborhood. There's lots of old trees there, and the block is outlined in yellow there. And here it is again. And this neighborhood features a lot of sequential house additions, you know, where much more modest age, where people added one room at a time almost. And the other thing is that this block had an unbuilt lot, which we used to model different size houses. Even though this whole block is zoned R60, there are a pretty wide range of lot sizes on this block. There's some lots that go up to almost 12,000 square feet, and there's other lots that are closer to 5 or 5,500. And here you see, you know, these houses really are nice, charming houses that have a lot of character. And here's the 3D model we built of that block. And you can see how there's a very consistent building line that lines the street here. These houses are lined up pretty well. Here's one that's turned here. Back here you see the unbuilt lot. You see this, actually this is quite a small lot here that is on the corner. And then there's some bigger houses in here. But you get a sense of the private space in the backyard is so premium here. There's beautiful, beautiful trees there. It's really this oasis that is formed by these houses that create this green zone that runs down the middle of the block. And here we see it in plan. And this shows you the actual lot coverage that there is. The average lot coverage on this block is under 18%. It's about 17.5%. What's allowed in this zone, remember, is 35%. So these houses on average are half the size they would be allowed.
So those sort of light areas of buildable as the setback.
Yes, that kind of shaded area in the middle of each lot that shows the setbacks.
Did you count the unbuilt lot?
No, we didn't. No. It's for the average coverage?
Yes.
No, I'll show you the data on the next slide. The house on the upper right here, since that's a corner lot, it has two front setbacks of 25 feet. So it's not the lot coverage that limits that lot, it's the setbacks. It's almost at the line of it being the maximum footprint. And here's the data, and you can see that the average existing coverage in square feet is 1348, and the average percentage of lot coverage is 17.31%, and the average FAR is 0.2. Then the next thing we wanted to do was to say, let's look and see what this looks like if everybody built as much as they were allowed to. And this is what you get in terms of footprint. These are huge houses. I mean, it's really kind of amazing to see just how big this is. And here, of course, you can see that the average coverage goes to 2,500 square feet. That's the average footprint. And I also have the live models of these, so if you want to see the live models later, we can show you those. Then we said, let's take that lake lot, that unbuilt lot, and just try some things out with it. And so this shows that unbuilt lot is 20% coverage, and the houses surrounding it are 25% coverage. It's just to get an idea of the comparison of lot coverage. Now note that under the existing zoning ordinance, patios and decks do not count toward lot coverage. So you can still build those structures. And here you see a different type of house. Then we went through and said, oh, well, we modeled 35% coverage, we modeled 30% coverage, we modeled 25% coverage, and then we said, let's look what 20% coverage looks like. And a 20% building coverage limit is essentially almost a preservation scheme. The red asterisks show the houses that have no growth potential under a 20% limit. And then you can see the houses that, with the exception of the two corner lots on the left, and those are very big lots, those are, say, 11,000 plus square feet lots. Everything else is pretty modest. And here's the data for that. And here's that 20% house surrounded by the other houses that are at 20%. And then we looked at, what we liked about this architecture, you know, that actually, what is good about architecture that allows you to have a house that is sized more to contemporary needs, but mediates that scale. Then the committee started looking at a proportional sliding scale of lot coverage. And they came up with this scheme where, starting at a lot of 6,000 square feet, which under the R60 zone is allowed 35% coverage, under the R90 zone is allowed 30% coverage, and under the R200 zone it's allowed 25% coverage. Those are all bigger lots, the other two zones. And the committee said, let's try a sliding scale. For every 1,000 square feet of additional lot area, the buildable coverage area would be reduced by 1%. So a 7,000 square foot lot would be at 29% coverage. You know, they started the scale at 30%. So automatically these R60 lots, which are mostly located in down county in older neighborhoods, automatically off the top lost 5% of coverage, which is really a very modest amount. And with each 1,000 square foot, the percentage dropped. And you can see the result here on these lots. Most of them now are 29% coverage. The two end lots that are the big lots are 25% coverage, and the one at the lower right is 26, and the one at the upper right is 28. That's still a lot of house, even with those limits. And here you see that on the oblique, like as a perspective. You can see, you know, those are still pretty big houses, even with those modest lot coverage. Now, along with lot coverage limitation, the task force also wanted to add height controls with it and to encourage gabled roofs, you know, that mediate the scale. And so that was another thing that was looked at. Some people had a concern about, for example, a lot that's 6,999 square feet could ostensibly have a larger house than a 7,001 square foot lot because of the percentage difference. So we came up with a formula to flatten out, or to even out the curve. And here, one of a more recent initiative on the part of some of the committee members are to exempt one-story houses from this ordinance, and that's about 40% of the housing stock. And I'm not sure where that will go, but this house on the corner shows the effect of that type of addition to legislation. What you would get if one-story houses are exempt is an attempt probably to maximize the first floor. They want to limit the second floor to 45% of the first floor, and so you would, I think you would, that would incentivize more lot coverage. So there's quite a bit left to discuss with respect to that.
Why do some? Why some parties want that?
I think the argument is that aging boomers want to age in place and, you know, want a wheelchair accessible house that's all on one story. I'm not sure if the market is going to go that direction now, but that's the argument. Then what we did was we modeled various ways in which the second story could be executed. You know, as a rear, upper story rear addition, a side addition, or a front of the house addition, conversion of garage into part of the living quarters and using a carport. It was very helpful to have this software to do these models with. And then finally, you can see here the effects of additions. For example, here is a house that has, it's essentially a central hall colonial with a little porch on it. And you can see here, it's had this quite extensive addition put on it and a porch on the front. And it really is probably built to almost certainly maximum lot coverage. So it really affects, you know, it includes loss of trees and it really affects the impervious area and the effect on the backyard, even to the neighbors. So these are some of the houses that people on the task force thought were more compatible, that we saw this one before. Here's one. This one was seen as being with only a one-story, one-car garage in the front. We were trying to encourage incentives to build detached garages in the rear so that the streetscape would not have cars parked in front of the house. This one has severe grading and slope and stormwater issues. And then there was this one. And that's it. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. That presentation was very helpful. Can you just explain a little bit about the status of the task force and what the county council might be considering, so we get a sense of where the county might be going, and then we can see if there's any particular questions about your presentation, and then I know that Wayne Goldstein has joined us, and he might have some additional perspectives on other possible ways that we might consider if we wanted to do something in addition to what the county might do, any of those that are closer to home. And one of the things that I was thinking about was if you can just give us a quick little synopsis of your understanding of what municipalities are able to do, if you know, that over and above what the county can do. My sense is that there are one or two pieces of legislation that enable municipalities within the MNC PPC area to kind of do. I know that Chevy Chase and Garrett Park and some others have either done or are considering those. So that would be helpful to know for context.
Well, you're absolutely correct about Garrett Park. That probably offers the most salient example of successful overlay zoning. As I mentioned, they incorporate floor area ratio as their control. It's 0.375. They also control the size of the second story of their homes. So what can be what the area of the second floor is, but it is related to standable height on the second floor. For example, if the roof is sloped, only a certain percentage. They actually know every lot that they have. I think they have 1,800 lots. I'm not sure how many lots you have, residential lots. It seems to me that you're sort of in that neighborhood, or not too far.
More.
Suzanne is shaking her head.
Larger? Oh, okay.
Because I think we probably have about,
Oh, okay, so you're
So
probably
maybe-
triple. Yeah.
yeah.
So you're probably at about 4,600 or something. That's still bigger, I think, than Chevy Chase. So if you wanted to incorporate FAR, it would be labor intensive, but my feeling is that you could do it. Chevy Chase, actually, the way they're going about it is they're going to have the data for each lot and each house in their database. And if you want to add an addition, you actually do your application online, and they have a series of incentives that allow you more floor area. For example, if the person shares a driveway with a neighbor, reducing impervious, they get a credit. If they have a detached garage in the back, they get a credit. There's various design aspects that they get a credit. And then once the application is filled out, it actually gives you an answer of how much you're entitled to. That type of accuracy, of course, comes at a cost. But it is probably the highest level of control. And theirs is based on FAR that includes the old house and the addition as well. There's no question that floor area ratio is the most accurate way to control the size of a house, the number of square footage, What it doesn't give you is where it sits on the lot, of course, what style it is. It doesn't control height. It really doesn't even control the footprint. It does to some extent, but it doesn't necessarily control the footprint, because FAR, like I showed the examples, it can be all one story or it could be four. And so to really render FAR as the control tool you would want to include either some design guidelines or height controls or setbacks. And I think it was because of that intricacy that the task force really went toward controlling the percentage of lot coverage with height. I think that was seen as, and in many cases, that's seen as, for the amount of effort it's involved in FAR, it's seen as a much more efficient and almost as effective.
Kind of gets you to the same place.
Yeah.
And
height and lot coverage.
Height, yeah, buildable lot coverage in the height.
And I think it would be helpful for us to understand where the county process is and where you can say as much as you can say with any degree of certainty where you think the county, what the changes that you think might be made at the county, so that we have a sense of kind of what the baseline would be for any change in county controls that would address this, so that we could consider, if we wanted to do something additional, knowing what that baseline is.
My understanding now, and this is still in the Fed committee for discussion, but an additional amendment, like I mentioned, was proposed that exempts one-story houses. So essentially what this formation of zoning text amendment does now is it takes two-story houses out of the R60, R90, and R200 zone. Those are typical lot sizes of 6,000, 9,000, and 20,000. So
And my sense is that most of our lots are R60.
yeah, okay, so you're R60, right? Two-story houses would be subject to this sliding scale. So a typical 6,000 square foot lot would be reduced from 35% coverage to 30. So 5%, you know, a two-story house, you know, that's, I don't know, 700 square feet or something. It's, I actually have a spreadsheet that I could share with you to show you various scenarios and what this would actually do to house size and lot size per lot, you know, on the sliding scale. So the two-story houses are kind of in this other category that's in this non-Euclidean world that's based on proportional lot size. And then the one-story ones would remain in the Euclidean world with no control on building coverage, presumably to meet the needs of the senior citizens that want to age in place. Height in the R200 is proposed to be reduced from, it currently is 50 feet, to the ridge line it would be 40 feet. So you would be reducing the massing, right? There is also an additional proposal that will allow 2 feet of height for every 1 foot in setback, but that hasn't been fully explained. And to my mind, that's provides a pretty steep sky exposure plane.
So it sounds like what's contemplated is lot coverage, height, and a sliding scale.
Yeah, right. That's the basis.
Okay.
And it's actually, it's very modest compared to other jurisdictions and the controls that they've imposed. But it was a consensus that was achieved through the task force. So it was, and the task force members ranged from, you know, builders to citizens and various other interests. So.
And can you give us a sense of the what municipalities are able to do within the jurisdiction of, you know, park and planning, where we don't have a lot of this, but my sense is that there are 1 or 2 pieces of state legislation that give us some ability to add, irrespective of going with a master plan overlay zone or something like that.
You could establish a neighborhood conservation district, and there's several models for this, and it can be the thing about neighborhood conservation districts, you can tailor it to whatever you want. It can be as mandatory as you wish or as voluntary as you wish. It can be administrative review, or it can be council review. It can actually require a formal approval with submissions of drawings, or it could be, you know, sketches on a napkin, I suppose. And you would have control of just where you want to be on that continuum. And you can also establish the boundaries. You could have 3 or 4 different districts. You could say, well, this neighborhood is, you know, 2,100 square foot bungalows, you know, but this one over here, these are 1,100 square foot bungalows. And so we want the height controlled more over here than over here. You can require, one of the most effective things is to require noticing for any, prior to any building permits. where the neighbors or the planning office or the council have to be notified prior to any submission of applications or that kind of thing. And that actually can very effectively start the dialogue of, well, what do we want in this neighborhood? You know, or what's too much, you know?
Okay. If it's okay with my colleagues, maybe Wayne could share any points that you'd like to cover, and then we can see if there are more questions.
I'm Wayne Goldstein. Mary Beth has done an excellent job of covering a lot of ground, including most of what I was going to talk about. So I prepared some remarks, and now I will see what I can say.
You got to take the red pen to them.
Information, yes. I'll just give you a little background for what that might be worth. In my position as president of Montgomery Preservation, Inc., MPI, and as a member of the Montgomery County Civic Federation Planning and Land Use Committee, I have been involved in a number of policy discussions over the last 5 years concerning the many impacts of infill development in existing residential neighborhoods. I helped plan 2 separate day-long conferences on such impacts in 2004 and 2005, and was a member of an informal working group which has created a draft enabling residential conservation district legislation for consideration by the County Council. I've observed the work, the process, and the legislative work product of the County Infill Development Task Force, as well as various efforts over the years in the city of Rockville. I've tried to follow the vigorous and ongoing local debates over the issue in the town of Chevy Chase Village, and now the town of Garrett Park. My interest in the subject developed because of my interest in advocacy for historic preservation. Successful historic preservation is about saving structures and their environmental settings so that new generations of owners can reuse them to live and to work in ways satisfying to both them and to their neighbors. Much of the work of the County Historic Preservation Commission, the HPC, is to ensure that new construction is both compatible to the affected structure as well as to the community. The compatibility extends beyond use of materials to encompass size, massing, and protection of significant trees. In effect, the Historic Preservation Commission has been a design review board for those historic resources. Tacoma Park has much experience with both historic preservation and tree preservation. As all of you know, it's never easy to balance competing interests concerning how to best change the physical environment where people live so close together. But it can be done, and it is being done in this city. So I guess the question is, how might the city expand such oversight to non-historic areas of Tacoma Park? You've already done so with your tree ordinance. That one issue continues to be an unresolved challenge in other municipalities in the county itself. Only Chevy Chase Village has also created and administered a tree ordinance. In trying to decide what to do about the size of new houses, which can easily be double the height and quadruple the square footage of existing neighborhood houses, the debate has been between limiting lot coverage or floor area ratio, as well as a number of other possible controls, as ways to control the size. Sort of push down with roof, maybe go out. Mary Beth has really told you about the different ways different jurisdictions around the country are trying to deal with it. And obviously, the more you control, the more staff you need. So I think what I'm talking about is perhaps less staff intensive. In terms of some of the work the Infill Development Task Force has done, I've had the chance to read over many of the letters sent to the County Council, both for and against. Among those who are supportive, their concern is the waivers for small garages and particularly for porches, because such features can indirectly reduce the overall size and massing of the house and help mitigate such impacts. However, there are concerns about potential abuses. I've said to some of my colleagues that perhaps there's a compromise related to the porches which might limit them to a percentage of the lot coverage of the house itself to ensure that they are not built so large as to be out of scale with the house and sort of become perhaps an unfair advantage to the owner who's, if they can't make the house larger, try to compensate with a larger porch. It's just something I'm throwing into the mix as part of the discussion about what to do about these additions that aren't limited by lot coverage. There seems to be 10 main issues that have been driving this debate. You may have considered all of them, but I'll just list them. Height, width, length, setback, massing, design of houses, and related tree loss, sun loss, privacy loss, and increased redirected stormwater runoff. That gets to the impervious issue. And so to some extent, we've tried to address that through rain gardens, through plans to ensure that the stormwater isn't redirected or doesn't end up in a neighbor's backyard and in their basement. That's, if we're going to allow a lot of increase in impervious surface, figure out ways to deal with that. One thing perhaps to consider is a requirement that driveways, perhaps patios, all of those surfaces that aren't going to have a lot of heavy weights on them from large vehicles could be pervious. And I don't mean necessarily pavers or grasscrete, but actual concrete and asphalt that is manufactured and planned in such a way that water can drain through. And that can undo a lot of damage, potential damage done by larger structures. Because if you require those to be pervious, the net result could be a less imperviousness overall than what we've had all along. Where while we've had smaller houses, we've had the standard driveways, patios, and all the rest, and so all that runoff, the water runs off just as much from just a patio as it does from a 2.5-story house. So if we mitigate there through, I think, what could be very fair regulations to require pervious surfaces, then that's one way to really address that particular problem of runoff. Let's see. It seems to me that the city could take one or more of three approaches. It could set stricter overall standards to address one or more of those 10 issues. The county's working on that. I'm not sure to what extent you could impose that citywide, but it sort of sets a different baseline, just as you've done with the tree ordinance. It could go further in the direction by empowering a commission to become the equivalent of a design review board for additions and new construction in all of the non-historic parts of the city. This would be quite controversial, to say the least. Or you could pass or advocate for the county to pass enabling residential conservation district legislation. Such legislation is being proposed through what I mentioned, the informal working group. After reaching an initial support of 20% of property owners, would then decide about what it is in their neighborhood they want to conserve, and to then draft standards to implement such conservation. Then if a majority of the property owners vote in favor of it, either they can create a committee amongst themselves or ask the county to create a neighborhood conservation district commission with staff. I've formally approached some past and present members of the Historic Preservation Commission to see if they might have an interest in serving on such a commission, and receive some initial favorable responses. And I think perhaps it's because the process of design review in this case bears many similarities to the current work of the Historic Preservation Commission. Now, getting to what's been happening in the state of Maryland, the state passed enabling residential conservation district legislation for its local jurisdictions about 20 years ago, and the city of Annapolis passed its own version in 1990. It created the Eastport Gateway Conservation Overlay District, quote, to ensure the preservation of the Eastport view of the downtown historic waterfront and to support and promote development and redevelopment in a character that is attractive and welcoming to the Eastport community and promotes pedestrian access to the neighborhood, end quote. This district, with strong involvement from its civic association, went through a revision in 2006 of its Eastport Residential Conservation Overlay District Design Guidelines. The city of Rockville created the Lincoln Park Neighborhood Conservation District in 2006 to ensure that the size and massing of new houses, including those resulting from teardowns, was compatible with existing houses. They're not necessarily looking to preserve the existing housing stock in Lincoln Park, but to preserve the character based on what the houses look like, what their sizes are. The staff person who was responsible for administrating the Eastport District recently went to work for Alexandria. This past February, he made a presentation about the Eastport District at a meeting of Alexandria's Infill Task Force. And you may also want to review the Teardown Mansionization Bulletin, Protecting Older Neighborhoods with Newer Tools, done by the Montgomery County Department of Planning and the Historic Preservation Commission in August 2006. The advantage of the approach of letting the neighborhood figure it out and then to some extent implement it is that your major responsibility would just be to create the process, but then let them have at it, work it out, and hopefully successfully work it out together. In recent years, some builders have begun to specialize in building smaller houses to meet such a particular demand. Because financing in the coming years will likely be based on one's actual ability to afford a project or a house, we may find that even those able to afford more will begin to focus on what they really need rather than what they imagine they want. If that is the case, limits to large additions, new construction, or other parts of the infill development equation that you may impose, or mechanisms to do the same that you may make available to residents, may be a little less controversial to support. Now, while we take a national timeout of sorts on housing construction, might actually be a good time to begin this discussion. So those are my prepared remarks. I'll be glad to answer questions if I'm able.
Thank you. One question that always brings to mind is something, for instance, the neighborhood conservation districts. Is that something that is, by definition, needs to be established by the county, by the city, by either one? It's up to how you do it. I'm not quite clear on that.
Either one. You could do this.
But the county as well could do it.
Right. I mean,
If the county really wanted to do it, they could do it.
I have forwarded to several council members. Part of it is looking for communities who are willing to advocate for that opportunity. I've had discussions with some, but it's sort of, it comes and goes there when people are particularly upset about loss of trees, large houses, they're energized, but that passes. So when there is sort of a sustained effort, I'll be there to help them explain it. And now, of course, I think if the infill development legislation is successful, it sort of raises the bar or settles some of the questions. I think it's a minimum effort, which is fine because Montgomery County has been grappling with this since 1997, and what they've achieved is the yellow permit notice and the limit on height and some definitions of how you measure the heights of new houses. So I think this is a big step forward, and if they then create the opportunity for neighborhoods to do more, were willing to do the work, I think, then that could also be beneficial.
Questions?
I just have one question. So when Garrett Park does an overlay zone, I understand they're responsible for the administrative task of keeping track of the lots and how much coverage there is now, but who administers the review process? Does the county administer review?
That's the county. All permits are reviewed and
So they say, okay, this project is proposed for Garrett Park, so it has to undergo a different type of review or be looked at through a different lens than something in Silver Spring, for example.
That's correct, because it sits in the zoning ordinance.
So it's not a cost that, if we were to do an overlay zone, it's not, that part of it is not a cost that we incur as a city, it's a county cost.
As far as reviewing each particular application, with respect to the elements that sit in the zoning ordinance, you would not be responsible for that because it's the zoning ordinance. Now, if you had complementary design guidelines that were only for your area, that were outside of the zoning ordinance, you would be responsible for that. But
So it sounds like the simple answer is it depends.
yeah. But, if you get an overlay zone, you can include things like that.
Right, because we already have a commercial revitalization overlay zone.
Right. It works in the same way.
Other questions?
I do have a question. When I talked to my neighbors about this, an issue that came up had to do with what would I call it, a sort of overtime effect. That is, you might start out on a block with, let's say, a bunch of small little bungalows, and over time, people add little bits on until pretty soon the houses are substantially bigger, maybe even twice the size. Then somebody comes along and they want to add, a third story, let's say. Well, it doesn't look quite so out of character at that point as it would have when they started out in the little tiny bungalows. So the perspective I'm wondering about in the materials that we have here that Mr. Berliner, Andrews, Ehrlich, and Trachtenberg have proposed, do they have what would I call it, an evolution to the standards so that as a neighborhood very slowly gets built up, that the standards will expand with that, that the envelope will get bigger, or are these things designed in such a way that you'll hit a stopping point, if you will?
Well, one thing that's interesting was when this additional proposal for exempting single-family houses or single-story houses was proposed, I through our GIS did a statistical query on our GIS system, like, well, what does this mean? How many are there of these, right? And we got the query to follow the sliding scale of lots. So we had all the ones that were 6,000 square feet, all the ones that were 7, And what was a really amazing thing about that query was that the average lot coverage in say, a 9,000 square foot lot, all the 9,000 square foot lots that have one-story homes in this county, the average lot coverage was like 16%.
16?
16. In the R60 zone. Now, they're entitled to 35%. So the footprint of those houses could more than double. I was stunned at how small these houses are. I mean, relative to what they could be. And so, if you're looking at evolution of house form, I think the current zoning ordinance, and even with this legislation, it will be able to expand out more than up. Now, 2 years ago, they enacted a reduction in heights for residential in the R60 and R90 zone. It didn't affect the R200 zone. And it went from 35 feet to 30. And, you know, a lot of the builders now are saying, well, we don't really know the effect of this, you know, just the houses under that new legislation are just getting built now, you know. One effect I see, though, at this stage is people are going more for flat roofs because it gives them, you know, if they get a bigger second floor, so you are actually getting a boxier look from a height restriction. Who would have thought, you know?
Lower the restriction and get a bigger box.
Yeah. And so the way to control that is either by the height of the sidewalls, you know, to make the height of the sidewalls have to be 5 feet or 6 feet or something to give you an eave. You know, if you do that, then you're dictating the shapes of the roof. You know, you couldn't have unless you stipulate, you know. I mean, you can get what you want. You just have to be sure what you want, you know. You can get anything you want. You just have to be sure what it is you want, how much flexibility. You know, it's always a trade-off between flexibility and labor intensiveness, you know.
And cost to administer.
Right, right. And so to more fully answer your question on this evolutionary thing, I mean, that really is a historical thing. If you go through all the colonial neighborhoods, you see this evolution in style, you know. And if you go somewhere like Poland, everyone builds their own house. There are no mortgages there. People have to build as they can afford. And so they save for years, I mean like 30 years to build a house because there's no housing financing there. It doesn't exist. And so you get these one-room additions, and it's whatever materials they had that year. You know, if they had terracotta block, that's what it is, that addition. The floor levels are like all over the place. I mean, you can go through the country and say, okay, well, that was added in the 30s, and this piece was added in the 50s, and this piece. I mean, it's sort of an archaeological story with it. And you can kind of see that in Montgomery County, like what was added when, and how much of the housing in this particular boom ballooned to meet the demands of the market, or what people thought were the demands of the market, you know, and that's what we're left with now, you know, are these like huge houses. But I think that this evolution is much more allowable in terms of the footprint spreading than the height. And I think that that really needs to be looked at, because in terms of the footprint, it is impervious area. It's like, it's much more efficient to heat a 2-story house, you know. The other thing we want to look at is new technology. Like if people start using wind turbines to get 10% of their electricity, or fuel cells, what is that going to do to the street, to the front yards, to what character is that going to have? Because it really is going to change. And I actually think the height thing's a better trade-off than, you know, than going for more lot coverage in terms of efficient building, reuse of materials, you know, compact, tight homes that we're going to have to build in the future. So it's something to consider.
Everyone can have a backyard wind turbine.
Well,
and everybody can have a couple stories on an elevator instead of the one story for aging boomers. Terry.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure. It sounds to me like, you know, your study that you've done and the thought that you've given to this goes way beyond some of the concerns that I've heard from people here in Tacoma Park. I think the biggest concern I hear in Tacoma Park is really the mass of the homes when they're being renovated and are rebuilt. Really, I mean, it's ridiculous to say that they're being renovated. They're essentially being knocked down and a new place put on a property that is out of scale with the other homes in the building in the neighborhood. And I wonder if, you know, rather than looking at lot size and some of the other things you presented tonight, if there might not be an easier way to say that something like the volume of the structure can't exceed by more than 10% any of the other structures within 500 feet of it.
If you wanted to enact something like that, you would have to have a way to measure those houses and measure the square footage in those houses. And that means that those people would have to give you access to do that, or they'd have to tell you. Now, so you're either relying on whatever they give you, or you have to gain access to their property to survey it. It's not impossible, but that is an impediment. You know, if you got a neighbor who said, "Oh, I'm not going to let you do that."
You've got the square footage of improved portion of the property, right? So that is available?
Well, if you're relying on the tax records, that's one way to do it, right?
Right.
It depends how accurate your tax records are, right? I found that they're not.
No.
It's more accurate than having a three-story gigantic structure built in place of a double-wide trailer.
Right.
Which is what happened in our neighborhood.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. 3 stories, huh? Huh. And when was that built?
Ritchie Avenue, you can drive past on the way home. Which when you leave Maple, go up Ritchie Avenue on the right-hand side. I'm sure it was within the allowable limits. I know that our housing department looked at that as they were working on the structure. And the footprint isn't that much bigger than the old footprint, but the structure itself is gigantic. It's beautiful, but it's out of place in the neighborhood.
Well, there was one jurisdiction that proposed, well, let me preface that by saying, in Montgomery County, there's a thing called established building line, which is the front line of the house. And the way it's measured is the average of the street. And the new legislation will propose that you just use the 2 houses next to yours, to the septic lot. And that's pretty good, because I think you'll get a much better line by measuring exactly to the people next to you, right?
Right.
Structures next to you. Other jurisdictions have proposed an established building height, where you do that same thing. You average the height on the 2 lots adjoining the subject lot, and you use that average to come up with an average for the subject lot. That's one way to go with this.
And I did mischaracterize it a little to dramatize my concern. It was a double-wide modular home, not a trailer. So.
Oh, okay.
If we can get a sense again of your sense of the schedule and possible action of what the county council might do in the near term with this.
There will be another Fed committee, planning, housing, environmental planning. I think it's November 10th, and when they're going to discuss this in full, and if possible, we may make another presentation to the council with our study. We are going to look a little more closely at the proportional method and the other provisions that have been included more recently.
And so potentially the full council could be taking it up in the next couple of months for adoption of whatever it is?
I would say probably December at the earliest, but don't hold me to it. I mean,
No, I'm just trying to get a sense of...
Yeah, the Fed committee next is, I think, November 10th.
Right.
So usually our last one was like last week.
Right, but the place where you are in the process of the task force and the Fed committee, we should anticipate that there will be some action by the full council in the very near term.
I would think that's correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you both very much.
Oh, you're
I
welcome.
really appreciate it.
If you want to learn more about neighborhood conservation districts or implementation, I'll be glad to volunteer the former Annapolis staff person who is now at Alexandria, because he was glad to come to Montgomery County several years in a row to give a talk and pictures and explain it in great detail. And so he might, since Alexandria is closer than Annapolis. He might be willing. Plus, I know a couple people who are now running things in Alexandria, and I'd ask them if they'd be okay.
And since many of them used to be in Montgomery
Yes,
County.
exactly.
And some of them live in Tacoma Park. Thanks again.
You're welcome.
When we set the agenda for this meeting, we weren't sure we would have time for a discussion of city committees, and we said, well, we'll try, we'll put it on, but I think given the lateness of the hour, that we will postpone that to another day. Oh, Jesse, you want to do it?
Just real quickly.
Sure.
The process that you came up with for reviewing applications, I wondered if you might want to take a minute or two to rethink that or think about how we could make that work a bit better. I also provided copies of the comments I've received so far. I don't know if you had a chance to look at them.
Yeah, those comments were very helpful.
To discuss that. I think have the people who have the committees come in if they want to. But I wondered if you wanted to address the application process.
I would say on behalf of the clerk that she's not sure that the process that we thought we decided on is working very well and that we might want to amend that process. Councilmember Wright.
I'm not entirely sure what the process is, but I think it's that we're supposed to talk with and interview individual applicants and then make recommendations.
On a ward
basis. My only two thoughts about that are, one, having thought about it more, I sort of like the fact, even though it's a minimal discussion frequently, that it's a public event, that people get to hear what the questions are. There's no sense that any of that's kind of secretive. So I like that a little bit more. The second is, depending on what ward you have and the proclivity of your ward members to volunteer, there might be a significantly unequal distribution of time spent on that task. And then the third would be just that having them scheduled and coming here forces it to happen, as opposed to, as council members, trying to juggle that individual task with many other things that we're juggling. So those are my three comments, which would sort of make me lean to maybe going back to the having people come before the council for those short discussions.
And
I would
guess,
agree with that.
And I guess the other thought that came up in discussions with the clerk was that another possible way to go was the discussion that we had about the possibility of having committee liaisons. You had comments down here? Councilman Robinson?
Yeah, I had one person I spoke with who was applying for one committee, and I guess I had a nice conversation with that person, and then I didn't quite know where it should go. I said, well, it sounds like you'll be an asset to the committee, and I threw out a couple of ideas of things that might be good to work on, but I didn't follow up talking to the chair of the committee, nor did we talk about what the priorities for that committee were. So I don't feel that the committee as a whole got any sense of where we thought it should be going. I won't say which one it was, but it doesn't matter. And I guess I would like to see us discuss before the committee comes before us what our goals are for that committee, so that when they come and when people say they would like to work on it, we can be clear about what our goals for that committee are. Specific goals. Can you do this by this time? And then people, when they come, will know what their tasks at hand are, and we can get a report next time they come of whether they were able to get some work done on that task.
Councilmember Stevens.
I would like to agree with Councilmember Robinson with one slight modification. That is, I think it would be helpful to have the committee as part of the discussion, but that when they leave at the end of the discussion, we have established the goals for them for the next coming period, whatever length that period is.
Okay. Any other comments? I think maybe we'll attempt to bring this back for a discussion and try and address some of the suggestions that have been made tonight and see if we can come up with some ways forward on this. Councilmember Snipper.
Did we address that first issue about, as Josh raised, about the application process, going back to the system we had before? I think that's the most immediate thing.
The application process, what?
I think Jesse wanted us to work on
Yeah, I agree with Josh on that.
Of going back to interviews?
Having them come before us.
Councilmember Clay.
Well, I read the comments that the committee members made about the application process, and I certainly appreciated them all. Particularly the one that said that the interview process has to be something more than checking for a warm body, which I have to say, over the 3 years that I've been on the council, most of the interviews have felt to me that way. There hasn't been more than one person who's been competing for the spot, and honestly, I can only think of 1 or 2 instances in the whole time where we didn't approve somebody where there was an open slot. I think the process is, it's a political universe, and we're politicians, and the committees are extensions of a political body, and so it doesn't bother me that the ward council members would interview people from their own wards and make recommendations to the body as a whole. I'm not afraid of that political process, and I think that if people are poor politicians, they would, hoard the slots for particular kinds of people, and good people look for a diversity of opinions on a board and would look to, to do that balance. And I think as a group we work together to talk about and look out for each other. I remember times when Doug hasn't been here, and we pointed out when there were people there that, hey, we have this person from Ward 6 who applied. What can we do to get them on the committee? And we look at all those issues and consider those things. So I don't object to that. I think that there's the underlying fundamental issue about why it becomes a test for warm bodies is because the council lacks a strong connection to the committees and the work that they're performing. And so I think if we had more of a connection there, we would have more intriguing questions to ask people and would have some sense of what we needed to ask them, because we would have more of a sense of what we wanted from them. So I guess I feel like to move forward positively, I think at this point, I think it's better at this point for the council members to respond for people on their own wards. We know them, we have some sense of them. It helps us to get a connection to them, and then move that forward, I guess, to the whole group for a vote. So there's some portion of the public process, and maybe split the difference. I think we should move forward with the liaison idea also, to start getting more connected to the committees and the work that's going on there. So those are my thoughts. And as you can tell, I still have my cold.
So I guess my original question was a process one, and we apparently have not reached agreement. So I guess that answers your observation that we have not reached agreement.
I guess my question at this point is understanding a little better what the real problem is that you're facing, Jesse, and how we could maybe mitigate that in the short term until we do make a decision on that.
Sure. In the short term, I have a number of applicants to committees that I need to process somehow. And so either I need council members to speak with them and tell me to go ahead and schedule them for appointment, subject to council approval, or I need to just tell everybody to sit tight, and we're still working out how to make this happen. So my concern is right now I've got applicants who are ready to serve on committees, and they're kind of stalled right now.
They have a pulse, sign them up.
I need a way to move them forward.
So is that near-term issue that we need a better closing of the loop by council members to alert you to the fact that they've been interviewed and that the council members have communicated with the rest of the council that that has occurred and that everything is fine and that the name is going forward to you for inclusion in an adoption of a resolution.
Right, that would work for most of them, and then we have one group that needs to be, where we have more applicants than seats, and that group perhaps needs to be dealt with a different way. But in the short term, if I could just move the other ones, that would be helpful for me.
I think it's a good idea to move the other ones, but also maybe you can give us a kind of timeline. In other words, say, Dan, here are 3 applicants. I will appoint them in a month unless you tell me not to. So put the burden on us. And then if we don't bother to call them, they'll be on the committee.
Well, you'll still be appointing them, but that we would schedule the resolution for appointment in a certain time unless I hear otherwise.
Unless you hear otherwise.
I can work with this in the short run. I think it needs a bigger discussion, but in the short term, I'll be in touch and we can move forward with some of these.
Yeah. I mean, in my case, I talked to the gentleman, and I think I didn't close the loop by telling you, I talked with him. And I think that my sense is that's all that I would have needed to do. And I should have known that.
I think that may be what we contemplated, but as we've discussed it, my sense is that it probably needs an extra step in there of not just of notifying the clerk, but notifying the rest of the council that this has taken place, and that kind of they're acceptable. Otherwise, it's kind of just beyond the group, and somebody else may have, come up with somebody else in the meantime, or who knows what. But I feel like it needs to go to all of us to know that that's taken place. Otherwise, it's Jesse and Barb and me saying, okay, that's on the agenda, and they get appointed, and the rest of you are kind of out of the loop.
Well, we're not out of the loop if we're given the person's name and said, please talk to this person.
Right. You may not be out of the loop in your particular circumstance, but the other 5 board council members are out of the loop.
But they shouldn't be out of the loop initially, because if Jesse sends a notice to all of us saying, Dan, this is your person, we all know about that, and she says, in 30 days, unless I hear otherwise, this person will be appointed, then the rest of the 5 of you or 6 of you can assume that I will have talked to that person, and if I had any issues, I would have told you about them. But unless what you're saying is that for each of us who has the responsibility of talking to a person, one of our constituents, we also have the responsibility of reporting back. And if that's the case, then let's make that clear. I don't think for me that was clear.
I'm not sure it was for anybody.
So in other words, if you want to make that, if we want to make that clear, let's do it. Is that what we're saying? Mm-hmm. So we agree on that?
In the meantime, do we want to make it by omission or commission on the notification?
In the short run, let me get back to all of you, refresh where you're at with the various applicants, and move forward in the meantime, and then continue this discussion.
Then we can prepare a motion just to have the mayor call everybody.
I would just like to point out to the viewing audience who may be confused about why this sounds very difficult, and it's only because it's about 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Any other comments? We're adjourned.